Ducked off low key, yeah, you know me. Kickin' with Tyree, hit it 3 like Kyrie.
So I'm Mekhai Lee. I'm a film director. I've got a short film coming to South by this year. My film is called Them That's Not, in accordance with the song by Billie Holiday, God Bless the Child. Them That's Got Shall Have, Them That's Not Shall Lose is the reference. And it's about a deaf girl coming home to her hearing family and having an unexpected run-in with her estranged father. Um, yeah, and I was born in New York. I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina. I live in Brooklyn again, so kind of a full
Mhm.
circle, return there. Yeah, I'm super excited. It's my first time coming to South by this year, so I'm really looking forward to it. I've heard only great things. I'm just really excited to be out there.
Yeah, it's gonna be a good time for sure.
Hmm.
Tell me about what sparked this idea for you. What what got the ball rolling on the short?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I was approached by New Fest Film Festival out here in New York, and they were looking to support a few filmmakers in their Sound and Scene grant. And basically, the grant is sponsored by Concord Originals, and they give 5 filmmakers the rights to songs in the Concord Music Library. And the challenge is to build your film around the DNA of the song, the essence and the thematic uh spine of the song. And my song was God Bless the Child. I was actually going
Mhm.
through something the day I was approached or like sort of caught wind of this project. I actually lost a family member of mine. My grandmother passed away that morning, and I had kind of decided that I wasn't going to do the application. I wasn't going to make time for it. And was just struck by everything that was happening in my life and just really considering who she was to me and who she sort of expected me to be. And I don't think she wanted me to, or she would have wanted me to use grief as an excuse not to submit myself to something like this. So I applied everything I was going through. I just, y- I it was experienced very I was experiencing very isolating grief, and I kind of connected that to what Drea was experiencing in her own grief, the protagonist of the film, as well as how isolating it can be to be a deaf or hard of hearing person in a hearing normative family, or even a queer person in a heteronormative family. So I kind of liked the swirl of metaphor there and wanted to really ilk that out for in the 18 minutes allotted that I had with the short film. So yeah.
Mhm. Um, is that why you set the reconciliation kind of a repass? And was that
That's
you kind of
correct.
calling
Yeah,
back to your own grief and
that's right. That's right. It's funny because the year that I was working on this film, I had actually experienced a great deal of passings in my family, and it was a variation of grief that I had been going through. In one instance, it was someone I knew very well but wasn't particularly close to, and it was sad when they passed. And then the next one, it was someone I was very close to, but other people were closer to. And in that repass, it sort of felt like a family reunion. A lot of us were just there to obviously pay our respects and you know um show love for the family members who'd lost someone. But it ended up being kind of an unofficial family reunion. We hadn't seen each other in a while, and we were all drinking and enjoying each other, and of course that's what the person who passed would want for us. But I did observe that the folks who I know to be very jovial and fun and lovely were grieving, and it was isolating for them in that stance. And then when it came to my own grandmother, who I was extremely close to, was like a second mother to me, I knew exactly what they were going through, and I could really empathize with that. So that's exactly why the film is set at a repass in the way that it is, and the way that we sort of explore the different experiences of what it is to grieve someone who's passed, whether you're close to them or whether you're not. Just the variations and the leveling of how a family sort of operates, a Black family specifically, when one passes. So,
Mhm. That's beautiful, man. Um,
it's,
uh, um, Dre is she's deaf and
hmm
in a family that doesn't care to know ASL or just doesn't know it.
yeah.
What? what was it like trying to create that isolation for her and show it within the film?
It was trying to create the isolation was it's an interesting challenge because it was more of something that I was going through personally, you know. So
Mhm,
it was one of those rare instances where it was sort of a natural progression to sort of imagine what the isolation could feel like. Um, but in getting the deaf representation or the deaf experience, and in Drea's instance, the hard of hearing experience, authentically correct,
mhm,
that required bringing in people who were living that experience, namely Angel Theory, who played Drea. Um, it was a matter of really just talking to her and shaping the role around her own experience. Like, I could only do so much with my imagination, and Angel really brought like a truth to it and a grounded sense of character and a grounded sense of self that I couldn't bring about on the page, or even just in directing it. So in terms of isolation, that was one place that I felt like I was able to sort of connect and empathize, and bring myself to the experience. But when it came to specifically with the hard of hearing experience, like that was something that, the actor brought about and made very clear. And also my director of artistic sign language, Alexandria Wales, who is a deaf woman and was instrumental in making sure that we had a correct representation on screen of what it was to be deaf and what it was to be in the mind and the eyes of a deaf person, paying attention
mhm,
to hands as opposed to faces and lips and alone, or getting, sign language is a three-dimensional language. So you really have to get every instance of a person, like every part of a person. You can't just kind
mhm,
of focus on their face. So yeah, that part was very clear from what they brought, in
mhm.
collaboration.
I read that uh, the father Samuel, right?
Hmm.
He's granted 1 day of freedom to
Hmm.
bury his
Hmm.
mother. How did you build the tension, especially with the reconciliation with his daughter? How did you
Hmm.
build that tension, understanding that this is a time limit? You only got 1 day to, recoup all those feelings
Yeah,
from
yeah, for sure.
years.
Yeah. Um, well, the time limit was what made it perfect for the short film to me, because we only had so much time to get a story out, and it just put this ticking clock over the whole piece, and it gave it a sense of drive from his perspective. He has a goal to speak to her, by the end of the day, because he only has this day to do so. Um, but when it came to Samuel, well, to be honest, that is something I know very well. In my own life, Dre's experience is also my experience. I know what it
Mhm,
is to have a parent who's behind bars and for a very long time. And while I am closer to mine than she is to her father, um, it's interesting because when my grandmother passed, the conversation around a furlough, around my father coming home, came up, and it gave me anxiety because it's like someone coming back from the dead or someone coming back from war, and you haven't seen
mhm,
them in a very long time, and they haven't been a part of your life in a long time. And even though you uphold conversations via the phone or, letters and things, it's not the same as having that person here in the real world, so to speak. So the idea of him returning, and it gave him anxiety, I'm sure, too,
mhm,
to come back and be with family and be with people and from the neighborhood who he hasn't seen in 20, 30 years, 2 or 3 decades. So it was one of those things I just found like very interesting for a character study for something like specifically with character, when it came to like how I could sort of like bleed out what that experience was on screen,
mhm,
and how I can use visual language to sort of portray that, you know. Um, so yeah, with Samuel, again, a lot of it came from personal experience and then imagination on top of it,
mhm.
So
That's dope. That's dope. How are Samuel and Drea almost mirrors of each other in ways they
Mm.
don't realize?
That's a great question, because it's one thing we talked about a lot on the day, or even in preparation, like in pre-production. Um, I love the idea that they both are isolated in their own regard from the family. You know what I mean? If you pay attention to how we represented them visually, both of them occupied spaces on their own. You know, they wouldn't really be talking to anybody, or if they were in the room, they were usually not sharing the camera space with any other actors or something. Or for instance, we would try to, if we did a group shot, we'd link everybody else to someone else and always make sure that Samuel and Drea were standing alone, you know. So in that regard, they were both like outliers to their own family, you know, and mirrored each other in that way. And they both were very close to the deceased in the way that the rest of the family wasn't, you know. If you watch the film, that the entire family is, they're sad, but they're partying. You know, they're drinking, they're eating. This is a time for joy for them personally. But when it came to Samuel and Drea, Samuel not having seen his mom in like 2 or 3 decades, and then Drea having spent her entire life with his mother, with her grandmother, you know, and suddenly losing her so young, you know, uh, loss and death being very newly apparent in her life. Um, and, you know, Samuel having lost his own life, so to speak, and then having to engage with losing another, they became mirrors for each other, you know? So I really liked that the isolation and them being outliers to the family was a sort of unifying factor for the two of them. And then with Drea specifically, it became interesting when the family was better able to connect to Samuel, because he could hear them. He could hear the music they were listening to. He could dance along, you know. It was easier for them to bring him into the fray than it was for them to accept Drea, who has been in their lives for the last 2 decades of her life. So yeah, in that regard, it became different for Drea to be a part of the room in a way that he was, in the same way that he was. So
Okay. Was there a scene that kind of unlocked everything for you for these characters?
it was the final scene. It was the reconciliation between Samuel and Drea. And it's interesting because it unlocked everything before we came to the page. You know, I knew that I wanted that scene to be the moment. That was the reason I was writing this, you know. That scene was the entire crux of the film for me, and everything was sort of leading up to it. So, and even on the day when we were shooting it, I saved it for the last day because I wanted to get it right. I wanted everybody on set to feel comfortable, the crew to feel comfortable, the actors to feel comfortable. I wanted Drea and Samuel, their real names are Biko and Angel, to have had a rapport with each other, to be cool with each other, to have this like sense of groundedness in working with each other that can't exist on the first day in the same way. You know, your first day of shooting is a lot of like figuring it out and like learning your team, you know. So, and we only had 3 days. So I wanted to make sure that when it came to shooting that final scene, they were there was no question, you know. And I feel really lucky that I always say it kind of felt like a brujeria that day, because the candles were going and there was like a lot of like just old spiritual energy in the air. We had these vinyls from all over, like a lot of the crew would bring in vinyls that they had at their house that their grandmother owned or things like that. We had a lot of old pictures of crew members, older family. A few people brought in like aunts and uncles and things like that that we could post up in the room to pay homage to where we came from in a way. So there was a really, really spiritual energy in that space that day. Not to mention the powerful, powerful essence of Billie Holiday and what her music means to a lot of people from that era, you know? So yeah, that scene was the one that I really wanted to get right. That was like sort of the spark for me. And I'm so happy that it turned out the way that it did, because I'm immensely proud of it.
What conversation do you hope your film sparks after the audience leaves the theater?
There's a few conversations, and it's interesting because what ends up happening, this question is kind of twofold. what ends up happening is that people end up talking to me about their relationships with their parents, or their experience with deaf people in their family, or they're feeling less understood by their own family at large, or even in small instances of smaller families. Um, but what sort of drew me to a thematic impulse for the movie was, obviously I was basing it on God Bless the Child, and God Bless the Child is a song that is like that heralds stark individualism and hyper independence.
Mm.
God bless the child who's got his own. Billie Holiday wrote it because as she started to come into fame and wealth, her mother would ask her for money a lot. And then when she was down and out, she asked her mom for money, and her mom was nowhere to be found, you know? So she was writing that song as a response. And in turn, the song ended up becoming like this big like anthem for the civil rights era, because we as a community, Black people were fighting for our rights, and we were fighting for our own, nowadays I feel like that song is interpreted to, or misinterpreted, or rather reinterpreted to mean like hyper individualism is okay, and not just rely on yourself and you got it, and like get it out the mud kind of thing, like just like really like you know just focus on the inward, and I really wanted to inverse that. I wanted to subvert that idea, So Drea is a character who is averse to asking for help and has trouble doing it for the whole film. Finally asks for it from the person she thinks would be the most able to give it to her, from the person who also offered her help at the beginning of the film, and that person says no. And so she finds solace and community unexpectedly in the last person she wanted or felt like she needed it from, and it ends up being the most fulfilling sense of community for her. And so I really want people to walk away understanding that community is of the utmost importance. The folks that you can rely on outside of yourself are not just should not just be wanted, but they are necessary. But it's also a matter of even if they don't look like you expected them to look, even if that community is surprising to you, to trust it and to lean into that. So that's one thing that I want people to walk away with. And I feel like after some time, people come to that. But off first instance, they're like, I had that relationship with my dad, and you made me want to call my dad. So maybe, as time goes on, people do end up like forging their own community in response to it. But yeah, that would be what I want.
Okay. Okay, man. How did you find laughter within this space of grief? Uh,
That's so interesting you asked that, because when my DP and I were working on it, as she was like showing me her lookbook and stuff, she was like, I want to go warm with it, because a lot of the time when you do funerals and when you see death portrayed on screen, it's cold and blue, and there's a lot of like desolation. And she was like, I want to show that in Black families specifically, but in some families, it's about bringing out the joy and the laughter, and like reminding ourselves of the love that person provided for us if they were loved, and that was really the wellspring from where it all sort of came. But I also lucked out in that I had a lot of funny people with us on set. Like, it wasn't intentional that I was casting people who were naturally funny. I just cast people who I knew could do the role and were really good, and I had worked with before, and like that I knew, they were part of my community. And they just happened to be very funny. So there was an air of laughter and levity and joy as we were shooting, even with some of the softer, more emotional scenes. Laughter was in the air, and I was really, really proud of that fact, because it kept set fun, but it also made its way onto the screen. And sometimes I'll rewatch the film, and I just remembered like certain scenes we were dying laughing at, or having like to stifle laughter. Sound was very important. It's always important, but it was very important on this one. And we were stifling laughter with a lot of it, because we were just trying stuff out. And it's not necessarily a comedy, but there are very much moments where there's a lilt, there's some levity to it, and I think it really does keep the film accessible. It's not just completely a Debbie Downer or something about something so sad. Like, there's a lot of joy in it, and there's a lot of like familiarity, especially for Black viewers. I think that people will really see themselves, the cousin walk that we always take when we're in a family setting, those things will feel very familiar to people who have experienced that, so yeah.
Yeah, the cousin walk is
Yeah,
uh
it's quintessential. It's like it's a part
it's,
of the, it's the experience, everyone
mm,
knows it,
it's
so
part of the routine of hanging out,
for
Thanksgiving,
sure.
Christmas,
The
whenever
cousin walk, and
you
whether or not you partake, you're still taking the walk. You're still going with
mm,
everybody. So yeah.
yeah. My last question for you is if communication is love, what happens when a family is refusing to learn your language?
Mm, I think you just isolate people. I think you really unintentionally omit. And I was actually having this conversation in a previous interview where a lot of the times in families we take that left for granted. We
Mhm.
don't really anticipate that that person might be hurting. We just take for granted that they've been there the whole time. Speaking of the cousin walk in that scene, those are the people that Drea would feel the closest to being around, and they take for granted that she can read lips, because she's always been able to, because she's always been there, and because that's their cousin. It's not that they love her any less. They just have a funny way of showing it sometimes, as we do in families. We take for granted the people we have in our lives. We take for granted the love that they show us and love we in turn give to them. We take advantage of the fact that we just have somebody there, if we're lucky to have someone there. But in that same breath, if we are lucky to have someone there, we should make the attempt to love them on their terms rather than on the terms that we feel comfortable with, because that really is when you start to, you know, take that person, take advantage of them and take their presence take advantage of their presence, Um, so yeah, I think it means that we become less, that family becomes less of a truth and more of uh, a name, like a misnomer for what this community can be,
Mhm.
So yeah, you start to lose the meaning of the word when you take advantage or take for granted, not loving that person or that group of people on their terms. So
Mm. That's That's it, man. That's all I have for you.
okay,
I want to
cool.
thank you first for
Of course.
kicking in with me, man. I used to go to a school called Milwaukee. I'm from Milwaukee, so Milwaukee
Hmm.
Sign Language. So it
Mm.
was like a mix of deaf students or hard of hearing students and like people who could. So it's like
Hmm.
sides of it. You'd have classes where you'd have an interpreter there. You have classes, you have a sign,
Yeah.
like people signing the entire
Hmm.
time. So it was kind of cool to be. It was in elementary school mostly. It was kind of cool to be in two different worlds, and you could see how people learn, how different it is, how similar they are to you as well. So
Yeah, very, yeah.
and how funny they,
Yeah,
they
yes.
are once you
Yeah,
start.
I'm so glad you said that. Angel's hilarious. She would call herself a sit down comedian because you don't realize she's funny until you sitting down next to her. You're like, oh shit, you're funny as fuck, She was cool. Yeah.
Yeah, man. So, are you going to South by Southwest?
Yeah, I'll be there the 12th through the 16th.
Okay, I'll be there around the same time. So I get there on the 11th, and I'll be there until the 17th, and then
Okay.
I'm flying out on the 18th, or I might fly on the 17th. They
Yeah,
didn't let me cancel my flight. I had to book
mhm.
another flight, and they
Mm.
wouldn't let me cancel it, and it was more to cancel than I paid for the flight. So I was like,
Word.
nah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna just, if I want to leave on the 17th, I'll leave on the 17th, but I might
Okay.
leave on the 18th. So
No, but
mhm.
make a connection. Like let's see if we can find each other out there. Come to our screening. We're playing Friday
Yeah.
at the Rollins.
Ducked off low key, yeah, you know me. Kick it with Tyree, hit it three like Kyrie.